I really couldn't tell which direction. Hey, how you doing?
I got all the weeds in my vegetable garden and flower beds and everything.
We haven't started and I'm wanting to get reason to get out.
Joe coming back? There's two winners you can talk about. One of them.
Oh, right, no problem.
It's not on the agenda, so we'll just talk about it.
You could have broken down the edit room to do
Yes. I don't have my cell phone with me.
Hold that with all this that we signed.
I know. Oh, is it really?
Yeah. Yeah, you want me, I'll put it
I
in.
didn't know that. Let me sign it first, I'll give it back to you.
Okay.
Folks, we're missing our solicitor who's supposed to be here tonight, and there's a hearing that has to be run, so we're just going to try to contact him to bear with us for a few minutes.
That was embarrassing for me. What? It's terrible.
I'm good. We finally went there.
Was that the same thing that I just gave you?
Yeah.
Did Bernie get one?
Yes.
Good.
Okay, no problem. Okay, take your time, we're good. Okay, just want to make sure you're okay. All right. Right. 1 minute.
No.
We're good. 1 minute away.
I guess I could, I mean, I'm an elected official.
Start the meeting, get to
Start the recording.
Yeah, we can, worse than you hear it. Usually it's middle.
No, you don't need one.
Still,
Please say that.
Thank you. Yeah, they really
folks, we're going to start with Adam. He's about a minute away, so that'll teach him. So please rise with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'm going on the record tonight that I plan on using this microphone to its fullest. Please throw something at me, John, if I
Call the meeting to order, and the first thing is to announce that we had an executive session with the Board of Supervisors and the Open Space Advisory Committee. Started at 5:30 tonight and ended just moments ago. The first order of business after that is to approve the minutes from the October 1st.
I move to approve the minutes from October 1st, 2018 as submitted.
I'll second the motion.
Any comments from the audience? Yes, Brian?
I'm going to go backwards. Can you give us a bullet point of the areas covered in your executive session?
We went over a lot of different things with the open space. Bernie, why don't you answer that one?
Real estate.
I didn't hear-
Did you know that, Brian?
What's that again?
Real estate.
Don't you have to be more specific?
Pacific.
We went over different parcels. We also went over the
Worksheet.
the survey, the
Worksheet.
worksheets to evaluate the property. And then we all got to punch Mike in his arm for his viewpoint on different things, so. Anyway,
Okay, thank you.
any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Next is the police report. Sergeant Russell, you're up.
During the month of September, the Westminster Township Police Department responded to 200 calls for service, including the following: the arrest of a 35-year-old male from Oxford for simple assault, trespassing, prowling at night, and driving under suspension in the 2100 block of Horseshoe Trail. Also, the arrest of a 28-year-old male from Westchester for possession of a controlled substance and driving under suspension in the 1000 block of Pottstown Pike.
Thank you. Any questions for? Thank you, sir. Joe, welcome.
Thank you, sir.
No, we've got a few things out of the way before you arrived. Next item is the approval of the bills list. Tonight's bills list is $30,404.68. The reimbursable bills list is $52,287.97. The two total, $82,692.65.
I move to approve the bills list dated October 1st, 2018 in total amount. I move to approve the bills list dated October 15th, 2018 in the total amount of $82,692.65.
I'll second the motion.
Any comments from the audience? Seeing none, I'll ask for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Erica, you want to give the treasurer's report?
Sure. Okay, thank you. For the treasurer's report for the month ending September 30th, you'll note that we have our monthly receipts for our revenues as well as our year-to-date receipts as well. We've added that. In addition, this reflects with the expenses as well for the year. A couple items of note. As we progress through the year, we had received in this past month, our pension aid, as well as our firemen's relief monies from the state. They come in, and then we distribute those funds accordingly. We have received our fees in total for the Country Music Festival. Happy to report on that. So that is noted. We have a few grant receipts as well, and our income, as far as our tax receipts, are a bit over the budget projections, so that's good news for us. As far as expenses are in line with the budgeted amounts. We are going to hit a few considerable expenditures for our road program, which are budgeted, but those projects are going to be finishing up here soon, so you'll note that for next month's report. This is posted on the website, and I welcome your feedback as we continue to update these reports. Okay, thank you.
Any comments? John?
Sure. I noticed for one that the $4 million disappeared from income, swept off the books. you might make a note about that.
Are you looking at the financial reports for the monthly reports on the website?
In August year-to-date, there was $4 million on this report you published, and this month
Yes.
it's not.
And to address that, what we are trying to do is track actual revenue expenditures without the sewer sale. And the $4 million is certainly on the books, but we're just tracking it that way, so thanks, John.
Okay.
Yes.
Further to that, I noticed on the income statement, there's $8,000 of monthly interest, $45,000 year-to-date as a result of the $4 million. And wherever the $4 million, I should think that $8,000 a month would go with it.
Well, yes, I understand. One of the comments you had noted, we talked about this, was skewing the numbers for the year because of that $4 million. So I understand where you're coming from. The treasurer and I are trying to work through this so we can actually accurately look at the performance. So that $4 million is still there. That interest income is certainly attributed to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
It may disappear too, I believe. One other comment, you make about $2,000 a month per million of interest income, presumably if it's $8,000. So if you could take some of this $1.8 million sewer reserve and put it with that $4 million, you'd increase your interest income significantly.
Thanks, John. Erica, this financial report, was it left as a handout for the residents?
Yes,
Okay,
yeah.
good. Yes,
All right, I'm betting that this is probably just an error creating the pie chart on the first page.
Oh, okay.
There's a 50% block in there which says it is total September gross revenue. So that should probably be left off so that the other pie slices take up the whole pie next time, if
Oh,
I'm
sounds
understanding
right.
it correctly.
Okay.
Do you see what I mean?
Did you understand?
Mike's nodding. He and I are agreeing.
Okay.
So, watch out.
Yeah. Okay, all right.
Yeah, I think it's just, like when you create the Excel pie chart, if you include your totals when you're selecting it,
Yeah, it could be.
that
just
it
a manual
accidentally
issue.
puts the
Yep.
totals into your pie chart when you want to leave them out, so.
All right,
There you
thank
go.
you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Any other comments on the financial report? Seeing none, we don't need anything
Nope.
to adopt it, we'll just move on. Any announcements, Erica?
Yeah.
No correspondence, we'll just breeze them through. Next is the subdivision land development, 1024 Pottstown Pike land development application. We're just going to acknowledge receipt
That's correct.
and forward this on to where?
Planning Commission, they meet Thursday.
Any comments, gentlemen?
Nope.
Okay, moving on. Weatherstone Phase 2 Commercial Plan, resolution of approval.
I move to approve resolution number 28-2018, amended preliminary final Weatherstone settlement plan approval, commercial area phase 2.
I'll second the motion.
Any comments from the audience? Come on, let's not let the Hacking boys go without a fight. Sorry, Mike, we like you, it's the other one.
I'm still here.
Any comments from the audience? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
This is the one it came for.
Yeah. Weatherstone Daycare Center escrow release number 1.
I move to approve the escrow reduction request number 1 for the Weatherstone daycare site improvements submitted by Hampton Group for the amount of $164,568.60.
I'll second the motion.
Neil, there's only one, correct?
That is it, this is the one and only.
Okay. In the future, let's make sure we...
Yes, I communicated that. One and
Okay.
final, yeah.
Okay. Any comments from the audience? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, under old business, Historic Resource Commission ordinance and public hearing. Joe, I think that's why you're here tonight.
Okay, I'll open the record for the Public hearing to entertain the Historic Resources Commission ordinance. I'll put in for the record, Board Exhibit 1, letter to the Mercury dated August 30, 2018. Board Exhibit 2, proof of publication from the Mercury for September 24, 2018 and October 1st, 2018. Board Exhibit 3, the attested ordinance to the law library that was sent August 30, 2018. Board Exhibit 4, the attested ordinance to the Township Planning Commission dated August 30, 2018. Board Exhibit 5, the attested ordinance to the County Planning Commission dated August 30, 2018. Board Exhibit 6, the ordinance itself. Board Exhibit 7, and legal notice. With that, I believe you've kicked this around at the different public meetings. This is the establishment, the repeal of the current language in the ordinance and the establishment of the Historic Resources Commission. Comprised of 5 members, and the initial term will be staggered, one on 1, another on 2, another on 3, another on 4, and the last one on a 5-year term. And then reappointments thereafter will always be for 5-year terms. With that, anyone have any questions on the board?
No.
Anyone from the audience have any questions or public comments? Yes, sir. Please identify yourself for the record.
Brian Curry, 512 Blackbird Road, Chester Spring, PA. With the rotating of the people and with the initial appointments, come 2019 reorg meeting, how many people will be appointed or reappointed at that point per the schedule? All 5 of them?
We have to establish it.
Yeah, it's all 5. The initial appointment is 5 members with staggering terms.
So in other words, we're not intending to appoint 5 members before 2019 then?
I don't know what the board's intent is. They can appoint them whatever they want. But
Let me go and rephrase the question. If the board appoints people before 2019, how many people will be appointed in 2019?
when the board first appoints people, whether it's 18 or 19, it'll be 5
Yep.
with staggering terms. And then every year thereafter, one of those would be replaced with a 5-year term. Or
So you've got 5 people in 5-year terms?
Yeah,
Got it. Okay.
5 people in staggered terms, where one will come up every year, and their new term would then be 5 years.
So if we actually did appoint 5 people now, somebody's going to expire at the end of this year.
Or they expire this time next year.
Oh, we can do that? It's not all a reappointment?
Doesn't have to be
Okay.
reappointed. No.
Okay, I've got it now. Thank
I
you.
mean, it's cleaner if it's reappointed,
Yes,
that's when you do all the
absolutely
other
right, yes.
appointments.
Yeah.
But there's no requirement that it be.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yes, identify yourself, please.
Sarah Schick, 1201 Davis Lane. Is there a consideration to hold off on appointments? Or is
I
that
think
not
it-
part of this? Is that part of the next agenda item?
I don't believe we've had the conversation, but after this hearing's done, I plan on discussing it.
Okay, I'll save my question. Thank you.
Keep in mind, everyone's all future terms then will come up in October.
Oh, couldn't one of them be a now until then term?
No,
Why would that be?
because you have to start right off the bat with 5, so they have the rotation going.
And giving them 2 extra months now would be unkosher?
No, we're just have to remember this time every year they have to do it. Versus reorg like all the other committees.
So,
And you can't make a 14-month appointment?
It'd have to be written, right?
Not really. I guess you change the ordinance, but
so Joe, if I understand you correctly, and I'm a little slow tonight, most nights, but, so you're saying we should wait until January to make the appointments?
I'm saying you can do the appointments anytime you want. But when you do the appointments, that will be the anniversary date for this committee. Most of your anniversary dates for committees are based on a calendar year. This would be the one committee that is not based on a calendar year. But if you choose to do that, that's your prerogative.
Well, it just seems kind of foolish not to get this committee up and running, but But the reorganization meeting in January, the first Monday in January, is usually historically when all committee positions are filled. So we, again, just doesn't make sense to me.
Which one?
The fact that we can't appoint 5 people with a specific expiration dates. One person, which, let's say they all start next month, but one would have an expiration date of 2019 in December. Another one would have an expiration of 2020, another one 2021, 22, and
Why
20.
don't you have to rewrite the ordinance?
I'd have to rewrite the ordinance, re-advertise it, have
And
another hearing.
it's only 2 months.
By that time, you're in January. But it can be done.
He's running this section of the meeting.
Okay. Mike's the one who said.
Microphone, please.
Yes, sir.
I think by popular demand, they'd like you to use the microphone. I can hear it.
I know, they all can hear me.
Sarah, that's not true.
So it would be a little inconvenient either way. But there are people on the HRC who are very anxious to have an HC established. And so I just want to put in a plug for doing it sooner than later, because we have stuff to turn over to the new commission. Thank you.
Please identify yourself.
Oops, sorry about that. I have hearing aids on, and I also have processing problems, so please forgive me if this is a repetitive question. But I guess I'm wondering, years go by so quickly, why are people being dropped after 1 year? Why couldn't somebody stay for like 2 years on the committee?
They're not being dropped after 1 year. When you first form the committee, if you want to have 5-year terms, one's got to be 1 year, then 2 years, and 3 years, and 4 years, and 5 years. So there'll be 5 appointments, one for 1 year, one for 2 years, one for 3 years, one for 4 years, one for 5 years. That way, every year, one person's up for a 5-year appointment.
Okay, that's my processing. Thank you, I'm sorry. Okay.
Hi, Jane Helm, 2563 Veronica Drive. I'm the vice chairman of the EAC, and this historic commission is replacing the EAC as the acting historic commission. And while we are very eager to have this passed on to some folks who know what they're doing, I think we can stick it out for 2 months if it makes everything more simple. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
Anyone else? Hearing and seeing none, we'll adjourn from the hearing, reconvene into the public meeting portion of the agenda, and the next item on your agenda is the adoption of the ordinance, and it's in a position now for your consideration.
I move to approve ordinance number 184-2018, amending Article 14 of the Township Zoning Ordinance, Historic Preservation Overlay District, establishing the West Vincent Township Historical Commission, providing for the membership process, organization, meeting requirements, compensation, appropriation, responsibilities, and removal of members.
One comment here, that's Article 24.
Oh shit, you're right.
Oh, there's one minor change. I went to the ordinance where it says only 5 or up to 7. I want it to be just 5, not up to 7.
Membership. Where is that?
What page is that, John?
Membership, right? Yep, that's where it is. It's under membership, second page. Yes, second page.
So Kathy, did you get that?
Yes.
So
So you take out minimum?
No, if I can find it.
201, 2401B.
Okay, the ordinance that I recommend you consider for adoption, under membership, second line, I would strike and up to 7 members.
Well, how about why have the minimum then? Might as well strike that. Just establish it as 5.
Consist of 5 members.
That's it, it's just the 5 members.
Yeah, leave it at that.
The initial, that's what it says.
Do we need to do anything else, Jim, with the minutes to reflect that change?
No, just that's being stricken from our proposed ordinance. Yes.
Do you think so you can strike without having to re-advertise?
You're allowed to make changes that are not considered material changes. And if I were to determine that's material, you'd have to come back in December to get this done, rather than
Okay.
just doing it tonight.
Why would you recommend against keeping flexible? We've had.
Because I can't have 7 members with 5-year staggered terms. How would I do that?
We've had other committees that have gone up and down in numbers without changing the length of the terms. Parks and Rec, for example, went from 7 to 9 to 7. And
But we rewrote the ordinance.
Yeah,
Yeah. Which we can do.
Yeah.
We can rewrite the ordinance at any time. If
So
if
is
they
there-
decide to go with 7 or 9 or 11, whatever the magic number is, they can always.
I'm just trying to save Mike money. So if we could find a different way to make it flexible so that you have 5 to 7, and in the event there's 7, they would be dropped in, year 2 and 5 or something, then you'd have an ordinance that you wouldn't have to change and flexibility, and you'd save Mike the money.
I would still have to change the ordinance,
Okay.
because the terms would be different. The terms would be different.
I was just suggesting you could pick the terms now.
For 7,
No, if in the case we decide to add more people, 2 people would come off one time, and,
we could restructure the ordinance. If the board wants to restructure the ordinance, you can restructure it, you can do it in December.
We can always change it in the future from 5 to 7.
Absolutely. And you have in other ordinances.
where I was trying to save my money.
Well, either way,
It's not your money.
either way, you would still spend the money.
Yeah, either way, you're gonna
I'm
spend money.
suggesting if you can just cross it out like that now, you could be flexible now, that's all. And then that money's already spent because he's here.
You want to continue, Joe?
It's your motion. It's up to the
It is
motion.
ours, I apologize. Well, before we vote on it, let's talk about the appointment of the future members. Erica, did you tell me this morning or yesterday that you have 4 applications?
I do.
So can we post it, since we have time to get more applications, post it on the website? But put a date on it, say everything should be in
Reminder.
December. You gentlemen agree with that?
Yep.
Okay. One last chance, any comments from the audience? Yes, Jim?
Point of order, was the motion seconded? Did I just miss that?
Did you second it?
I believe I did.
No.
No? No. Oh, I'll second the motion then.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Jim. Sarah would have caught up on that eventually, and she would have given us hell. She would have. Okay, any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next is natural lands demolition permit, decision on a Class 2 historic structure, domestic outbuilding located at 1880 St. Matthews Road.
I move to allow for the demolition of the Class 2 historic structure, domestic outbuilding located at 1880 St. Matthews
It's just for discussion purposes.
Okay, I'll second the motion.
Any comments from the audience on this idea? Oh, come on, all these people have to be here for that reason.
Well, the
Yes,
EDC
Jen.
wants to speak, but I'm sure Brian wants to speak. Brian, you want to go first? Yes, first?
That was very kind of you.
You're going to have to come up and use the microphone. Go ahead.
Trying to decide whether I need to say anything. See, I wasn't gonna wing it tonight, I came with a speech.
Oh, geez.
All right, well, since I went to the trouble of writing this, I may as well read it, right? So I'm here tonight to request that the township issue the balance of Natural Land's demolition permit for the portion of the preserve known as the Ralston Farm located at 1880 Flint Road. The Historic Resource Committee was notified in early spring of this year of Natural Land's intent to raise the turkey sheds and what has since become known as the machinery shed and the domestic utility building. On April 26, I toured these buildings with members of the HRC, with one member taking extensive photos of all buildings. In July, Natural Lands formally submitted a demolition permit application for the turkey sheds, machinery shed, and the domestic utility building. The application was reviewed and accepted by the Township Zoning Officer and Building Inspector. The Economic Advisory Council, at their August meeting, voted in favor of the demolition permit for the turkey sheds and the machinery shed, but requested more time to study the domestic utility building. Subsequent to this EAC meeting, permits were issued by the township for the turkey and machinery sheds. In August, the HRC issued a report on the history of the Ralston Farm. This report was very well done, it was very informative, and is a must-read for anyone with interest in the township's history. At the September EAC meeting, other Natural Lands staff members, meaning not me because I was away, including a senior management officer, came before the committee requesting that the balance of the permit be approved so that the domestic utility building could be raised. The EAC did not act on this request, stating that they wanted more time to review and study the building. This meeting was followed a few days later by a site visit conducted by a Natural Lands staff member with 30 years of experience in building rehabilitation. This site visit was attended by members of both the EAC and the HRC. In early October, the HRC issued a report specific to the domestic utility building. As with the previous report, this report was well done and very informative. It also included several recommendations for Natural Lands to take into consideration as alternatives to demolition. At the October EAC meeting, Natural Lands again requested that the balance of the demolition permit be issued. With one abstention, there was not a quorum to take a formal vote, and it was recommended that we bring our request to the Board of Supervisors. So, I am here tonight to again request the issuance of the balance of our demolition permit. Inasmuch as Natural Lands recognizes the role that the domestic utility building played on the Ralston Farm, appreciates the hard work and good intentions of certain members of the EAC and HRC, and has taken into account the various recommendations of the HRC, we remain of the opinion that this building will require too much work, effort, and expense for any short or long-term solutions. Throughout this process, Natural Lands has committed to maintaining the retaining wall that is a part of the domestic utility building, stabilizing and perhaps partially or fully restoring the stone spring house, and most recently, to work with the township in establishing some recognition of the Ralstons at the farm centered around a newly discovered gravestone. We are now officially in the third month of this process and respectfully request that the supervisors take action tonight to issue the balance of our permit. This will enable Natural Lands to complete this phase of work on the preserve and begin the next phases to complete the preserve and finally open Bryn Coed Farms to the public. Thank you for your consideration.
Oh, you're not up to hook, you're gonna have to take questions.
Do I stand here? Sure.
You mentioned a lot of work that had to be done. Do you have monetary figures attached to those?
No, actually, we never, because our desire all along has been to demolish the building, we never got actual quotes or figures for that, but, you know, based on our staff members' experience, it's just going to be in the thousands of dollars, not hundreds, and certainly much more than Natural Lands is willing to spend.
And could this building be used for anything to enhance the home that you're keeping and refurbishing?
Well, as I said, the HRC put forth several recommendations for the reuse of it, and they were taken into account very seriously. But the short answer is no. It really just not. It's not big enough to really house equipment or anything like that. It's just probably fit into that.
Wasn't there an old hearth in there?
I don't know what?
An old hearth in there that?
Hearth?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's a brick and stone, somebody from the HRC would be better describing it than me, but it's probably about this high, and it goes up to an exposed chimney, and it was meant to, by my understanding, I'm not trying to do it justice, but it was meant to hold like an iron kettle or something where they could, for laundry or renderings or something like that. It's probably about 1.5 feet, 2 feet wide, and maybe 3 feet deep, and the main part of it is probably a couple feet high, and then, as I said, there's an exposed chimney.
Has anybody dated that?
That specific, that I know parts of the building have been dated based on architecture and things, but I don't know specifically about that.
So that it's almost entirely German siding, are you gonna keep that?
Now, from my reading of the report, there was some German siding, and please jump in if I have this wrong, on the north side of the interior part. And of that wall, probably only a quarter of it still has the siding on it. As of tonight, I was out there about 6:30 tonight, so.
Okay.
We'd be
Yeah, when
happy,
you
we'd be
look at-
happy to remove that and save it for the township, if they want to
Well,
use it. There's really not much on it, to be
Okay.
honest with you.
Maybe it was on another building that I was thinking of.
No, I think the exterior is more traditional stuff.
What's the latest feedback you got from the EAC?
Well, as I said, we went through 3 meetings with the EAC, and at the last meeting, one person abstained, so there wasn't a quorum for a vote, so it was basically recommended we come here to the supervisors.
We have people here from the EAC, correct?
Yep, ready to go whenever you want to talk to
Any
me.
comments for Brian? Or any
Yeah, she's
questions?
gonna-
I have a whole thing to give you, so if he's finished, I'll come up and speak. Give you all your details.
I'll tell you what, I'm finished, but I'll stay here in the front row and address any
Fabulous.
other comments.
Thank you. First of all, on behalf of the EAC, thank you so much for our new ordinance. We are thrilled, right, gang? Okay, so like I said, I am the vice chair of the EAC. Vic Laubach, our chairman, cannot be here tonight, so I'm going to speak for us, give you the background of what's going on. So what has happened with this is it came to us in July, and the EAC did vote that the equipment building could be knocked down, but had reservations about this smaller building, so asked for more time for it to be looked at and all of those things. So that's what we did, and it came back to us then in, in August. We talked about it again, and we made a motion. We recommended the core of the domestic outbuilding attached to the farmhouse be preserved, allowing the garage portion to be removed pending review of the HRC subcommittee. So what this was is, we wanted this building kept, and we voted that way, but we were trying to work with Natural Lands and saying, well, maybe if our historians looked at it and said, well, that end part that looks like a garage wasn't so important, we would let them take that part down. But we did have our HRC members come take a look, and at the last meeting, we had 3 look at it. It was pretty clear to them that they thought the whole building should stay intact. You can't just remove a piece of the building for historic and structural reasons. Now, we had a problem at our last meeting. We had 4 of 7 members there, which was a quorum. But when we went to vote, Vic Laubach abstained. She works for Green Valleys, didn't feel comfortable voting on this. So we could not take a vote, so we had this problem now. And we don't want to hold Natural Lands up any longer, so that's why I came to you. So that's a quick thing. Now, let's talk ordinance. So we have for you guys. So, as part of the process, we were given this by the zoning officer, Tracy Franey, when the last time we were supposed to be looking at a demolition permit. And I've highlighted in blue what exactly we're supposed to be looking at when we look at the demolition of a building. So it's real important, we're supposed to follow the ordinance, so that's what I'm gonna cover here. We need to look at the effect of the demolition on historic significance and architectural integrity of the neighboring resources. We need to look at the feasibility of adapting and reusing the structure. All conceivable alternatives to demolition, including relocation, expert testimony such as a structural engineer, historic architect, something like that. The archaeological potential of the site, and then any public comment, which we do get at our meetings, about what we would do on the building. You can see that the ordinance does not allow for us to talk about how much things are going to cost to fix, or whether the applicant has the money to pay for it. It's all about the historical significance of the building. So,
There's a date there then to the right of this that says February 7th.
right, that was from, this was our very first, this was for Ralston Barn and another property. And the zoning officer, this is the first time the EAC had ever done this, and so she gave us that checklist so we had something to look at. And so what she did there is she wrote down the parts of the ordinance that we're supposed to look at, so any demolition, that's our list.
But the meeting date of February 7th, 18.
That was for the Ralston Barn. But it was nicely printed there, I thought it was easy for you guys to read, in case you didn't know exactly what the ordinance said. You understand, John? You good? Okay. So let's talk about the history. This property oozes history. Ralston family was a significant early settling family in West Vincent, came to West Vincent from Ireland in 1728. At one time, Ralstons owned over 800 acres in Vincent Township, 10% of the township. In 1795, this 160-acre property remained in the family until the 1900s. And the Ralston family in general is very significant. Robert Ralston acted as a lawyer. He led the Collihill Manor case for Vincent property settlers in the late 1700s when they were trying to get their land back from William Penn descendants. John Ralston was a Revolutionary War lieutenant colonel. He famously led George Washington to the Reading Furnace after the Battle of the Clouds. This family was prominent. They went on to have members move to Philadelphia, where they were very prominent there. So this is our most prominent family attached to this property. All right. Sorry, I've got so much stuff. All right, so that's the history. So let's talk about the building. We have more handouts. So this is a view of the building from below. The spring house, which is in ruins, would be behind me. The building we're talking about is on the left. You can see Captain John Ralston's gravestone laying in the front. We were excited by finding the gravestone. It confirms, when you're a historian, when you find something concrete like that, confirms what you found. This is the rubbing from the stone. John, I'm going to use your thing. And what you're seeing here in this picture is what we would call a cultural landscape. You can see the gravestone. You can see the building on the left and the building on the right. They form a picture. This was a farm. Farms always have outbuildings. If you take this building down, there are no outbuildings left. We allowed the turkey sheds to go down. The big barn was already down. I think it fell in the 1950s. We allowed the equipment barn to go. So we have compromised with natural lands on this. We just think this building that is so close to the house, served as a kitchen, as a wash house, all kinds of different things, is an integral part of this landscape. And if you're taking that down, all you have left is an old house. You could lose the whole farm field. The spring house is in rubble. I know Natural Lands has said that maybe they'll be able to put it back up. But if you take it down, not much left. So let's talk a little more about what this building is. So here you can see the inside. So the top picture is the actual building. The bottom one is that hearth that Bernie was talking about. So that hearth is called a, let's see what I would call it. A kettle setup.
Set kettle?
What would you call it?
Set kettle.
A set kettle, okay, see, the expert tells me. Oftentimes there were two. So here you can see, this is from the PA Historic Museum and Commission, showing two of them. This is a recognized building with the PA Historic Commission. This building is rare in our township. I'm lucky enough, I have one on my property. I know of no others. I don't know if there are any or not, but they are rare.
Jane,
Mhm.
this one, why is this important? There's only one there in there.
Right, so this one only had one, but you can see, if you look at it closely, see it has these little doors with the metal, exact same here, and actually that metal plate, when we visited, is sitting right on top of it.
Excuse me, can I just interrupt?
Sure.
That is not, that is a Buckwalter thing that should have been on the coal stove.
Oh, so you don't think that's the missing plate?
It's not the missing
Okay.
plate.
Anyway, so you can see that this is a recognized building from the Historic Commission, and this is what you've got in that building right now. All right, I'm gonna finish up here. Just give me a second. So as to whether this building has other uses, this building is, with a little creativity, tons of uses. I mean, wood shed, potting shed, general storage facility, she shed, man cave, craft barn, all kinds of things. We use ours as a party barn. My husband has a big wok, which he puts on the one side, which he does stir fries in, and the Yingling and the wine go in the other kettle. I hang my herbs in there. It's a fascinating building. People are fascinated by this building. So as I go through what the ordinance says, is the demolition of this building going to affect the historic significance of this property? Absolutely. Takes it from a farmstead, from a cultural vision, to one farmhouse sitting there by itself. Is it reusable? Absolutely. Can it be fixed? Well, I'm not a structural engineer. I know it has some problems, but I can tell you that it's absolutely fixable. Never are you going to find an antique building that doesn't have a little bit of rot, doesn't have little structural problems, and it's all fixable. I will say our ordinance does not require Natural Lands to bring this building up in any way. We have demolition, we cannot do demolition by neglect, which means, basically, I think the zoning officer would say, make sure it has a good roof on it, make sure the windows are closed up, put a lock on the door, and I would say this building is dry on the inside, the windows are intact, and there is a way to close it up. So there's nothing that says that Natural Lands has to spend a lot of money on this, so we have to remember that.
But Jane, what would be the purpose of not fixing that? I mean, there was
Well-
several issues that I saw when I was there.
Well, in the future, I think that they will find a use for this building. I understand right now that their focus is on fixing up the house. I went in the house, I understand that. But there's a million things you can use this building for. So, and I think in the future that they will say, oh, okay, we could use this for that, and then maybe it would transform that into that. If we allow it to be taken down, it's gone forever. And it is a rare building in the township. There aren't that many of these. Because they have a stone foundation, mostly they had wood sides. And so, they didn't last like the rest of the buildings that are stone on 4 sides. And as people got ringer washers and they weren't butchering the pig anymore out in the back, this building didn't have that many uses anymore, and so people didn't fix them up and they fell down. So having someone left is pretty special, actually. Okay, do you have something you want to add as our expert?
Covered pretty well.
All right. You guys have any other questions?
Jane,
Yeah.
they got the October 2nd letter, right?
Yes. So we had two. We had a September and an October
We have 3.
from our, written by Kate Farnham. And it was recommended that the building be saved in its entirety, and there's lots of reasons. I thought this was forwarded to you, but if anybody's interested in looking at,
We have them. or
you
I
have them?
yeah.
Yes? Okay.
Because it has a
All right.
list of specific recommendations.
Any other questions?
Any questions from the audience for Jane? Thank you, Jane.
Okay, thank you.
Tommy?
Just to, I recently toured the building. I think I sent my opinions on it. One thing I wanted to point out is in the report, they were talking about it being, the metal thing for the, I believe it's a pig rendering tub, or that's the colloquial thing, but I'm going to point out that, first of all, that tub had Portland cement in it. It dates it far later than what we're talking about. And the Buckwalter thing, Buckwalters were, the coal stoves would have been around since 1844. But when it started, Buckwalter stoves were continental. They didn't become, sorry, Buckwalters until almost 1900, which means that coal stove and that probably dates the building to 1900 or after. So, is it an outbuilding? Outbuildings are extremely important. But if it doesn't tell the same tale that the historic building is, I think the tale in that property is the Ralstons and the cemetery and the revolutionary stuff and other things, and maybe the foundation. But honestly, underneath, I didn't go on the original tour, but when we went, there was considerable insect damage. And it was propped up by a fairly new, support system. On top of it, there's about 3 or 4 inches of concrete. And if I was Nat Lands, I would be extremely concerned with somebody coming in getting hurt if that structure collapses. It's one thing to say we should make it a man cave or that, but it's not a private home. It's going to be, the public could get in there. And so you're putting people at risk, and you're putting Nat Lands at risk for the insurance if something happens. And I think we have to keep an eye to that. And to finish, I want to say thank you for doing the Historical Commission. I've only been asking you for this for, I feel like a decade, so thank you very much.
Any other comments from the audience? Yes.
Merrill Joplin, 2120 Flowing Springs Road.
Unfortunately, you gotta come up. Thank you. I know it's a pain, but makes it so everybody can hear.
So my question is, couldn't they put up a big chain link fence around this particular building so that people wouldn't get hurt by it? And yet it could be kind of safe. Our township is so unique with its beauty and charm. It seems to me that it would be very sad to lose a historic building. So wouldn't just the chain link fence, or wouldn't there be just some way to keep people out from being hurt and let it stay? That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Kate Farnham, 988 St. Matthews Road. Just to follow up on what Tommy was saying, we're not arguing that the hearth and the chimney are from the 1700s. Our concern was that the basis of the building may be the earliest home that was on the property. The foundation may date back to the 1700s when the Ralstons were living there. Our research showed that they had a log house on the property as of 1798. The current house, farmhouse stone building, was built, approximately, 1800, 1820 period. So it's not the original house on the property. There's no standing log cabin, obviously, on the property at this time. But our feeling is that the original house would have been either on or close to the present site, and just the fact that it's the foundation is banked into the hill the way it is, makes us suspect that it's possible that that foundation of that building may represent the early house. I mean, the upper part of the building, the wood frame structure, the hearth, the chimney. There is a stone chimney stack underneath the existing chimney, but we're thinking that the upper part of the building was probably redone pretty considerably in the, again, around 1890s, early 1900s, based on the windows, the siding, the style. But again, our concern is that, number one, the Ralstons are a very important family. This may be an archaeologically very sensitive area. Again, we don't know where their original house was, but again, I would suspect it's either here or close to here. The other concern is, again, as Jane was saying, that once you take away this outbuilding, this property, it's no longer a farm. It will no longer be cultivated, it will no longer have fields, it no longer has barns or turkey sheds or any kind of agricultural context. And once this building goes away, that's the last of it. It just becomes a house. And that's I think our concern. It's the significance of the Ralstons, and it's also most of us are very supportive of natural lands. A lot of us gave money so that natural lands could do what it's doing. We love that you're preserving the land and the property and the house, but we just would like to see this small building stay. We do feel a use could be found for it, and we are willing, all of us are willing to get together and try to form a partnership with Natural Lands to raise funds to try and save it.
Got a question for you.
Yes.
You mentioned the foundation under the shed building.
Yes.
The domestic outbuilding. You believe there's a good possibility that foundation is for the original house. But the retaining wall goes way beyond that in front and back.
Yeah.
On both sides of that building.
Right.
So is that the same, would that be, that would be a very large footprint for a house of that.
No, I don't think the wall is the footprint.
Okay.
We think the wall was built on either side of the house.
You mean after the house?
After the cabin or the early
You don't
house.
find it hard to believe that 20 by 30 shed would be the original foundation of the house?
Houses back then were small.
And the long wall was part of the farmyard enclosure.
Yeah, there's a big drop in the grade from the upper part to the bottom part. They built a retaining wall, and that was done.
Well, the whole structure is about 20 by 30, but only the part you're referencing is like half of that.
Right. Well, it's long. The older part is more square than a long, it's not as long of a rectangle, let's say. The other end is an extension. And again, that's our best guess too. We haven't had a professional architect or structural engineer look at it, so I'm not.
I came up to ask you to talk more about the preservation partnership that was in your October 2nd letter.
So I think we sent you all the I forwarded all the various handouts. We are willing to try and get the community together to try and raise funds. We don't want funds to be taken away from restoring the house or creating the preserve. We'd really like to see this used for interpretive potential. Again, it would be useful to help interpret all the work that was done on farms to process food, to keep farms going. It's the work of farm women particularly. It's a women's space. And it's something that often gets overlooked. People look at it and they see a junky old building, but it really, even though again, it may be a newer context, it was definitely owned and used by Kate Ralston, who built the big stone house up at the corner with the turret on it. And she was a pretty dynamic, one of the very dynamic owners of the property. She was the last Ralston landowner, actually. But she, again, the work that was done over time, this kind of work was being done in buildings from the early 1800s. It was being done in work from the early 1900s. It didn't stop until refrigeration and electricity and washing machines became a thing. As these buildings have become obsolete, as Jane said, they are vanishing. And we have an opportunity to preserve one, and that's what we're asking to do. But the partnership is to try to unite the community around preservation of our history and to help create something you could use and that the community could use. That's our intent. We're not trying to stop progress or thwart any plans. It's more, we see an opportunity and we hope other people would see the opportunity.
Thank you, Kate. Did you have something to add?
Yes, just one other thing. When Brian O'Leary was here from Chester County Planning Commission to talk about Landscapes 3, he talked about the importance of the context of preservation, that having a house sitting there by itself is not what they mean by what is the context, the historic context. So keeping the outbuilding there, as Jane and Kate have indicated, really gives you much more of the farmstead and not just a house. So that's part of one of the first section of Landscapes 3 is about preservation, and that's one of the cornerstones, is not just to keep the building, but keep the context. Thank you.
I'm concerned with what we're preserving. Are we preserving history, or are we preserving a story that we want to tell ourselves? Historically, when we say that barn was important because someone hid out in colonial times, and then we learn that the barn had actually burnt down and the barn was rebuilt. I'm talking about another property. Or this, well, it would have been an outbuilding, it would have been important to a tale of females in thing. We're not actually discussing history. We're talking tropes at that point. We should actually care about West Vincent history, and we really, really, really need to pay attention to what's important, what's historical, what happened, what's true. Not this building that probably was put up in 1920, but it was important to this farmstead from the Ralstons, from from decades before. But it's important because it's an existing outbuilding. Well, the fact is, outbuildings, farms and farmlands and rural things have outbuildings. They've always had outbuildings. Outbuildings are not made to last forever. That's the whole point of outbuildings. When we get them, we want to keep them if we have them, but let's not lie. Let's not make up myths about them. It doesn't matter if Nat Lands agrees to keep this structure. Great. But if Nat Lands puts it up with a marker saying that this is part of the Ralston thing and predates it, they're lying. And they're not helping anybody understand their history of West Vincent. So can we please, like, take the emotion out of it? This is what's wrong with our existing HC. Everybody gets emotional, and they want to say things, and history is often discarded. And it just drives me crazy. I have a building on my property that has a pig tub and has all this stuff, and I can tell you it's from 1920s at the earliest. Looks almost identical, except it doesn't have a tree growing through the thing. It doesn't have wide gapes. It's not sagging and has insect damage. So this notion that there aren't any things like that in the township is just not true. Jane has already said she has a building with a pig rendering tub. I do. If you've gone on any kind of Chester County Day through this thing, trust me, they exist. But can we just, tell the truth about why we want to save the property? That's all I'm saying, I'm sorry.
I wanted to ask you a question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
For those of us who don't know you and don't know if you have some...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Some area of expertise or authority. You're speaking, obviously you're very emotional about this thing, but you have...
I am emotional. I'm Thomas F. Balchinos. I live on 1415 Hollow Road. I have been involved in historical preservation pretty much all my life, since I was 7 years old. My family was involved in historical preservation. I have done this in college. When we first moved here, I have a Greek revival home in Birchmanville. I have also worked to save the schoolhouse property from development. And unfortunately through that, I got baptized right back into historical preservation. I've worked on the historical committee to the point that I grew very, very frustrated because we often were chasing after things that was not necessarily in our best interest. Does that help?
Yes, it does, thank you. And the reason I asked this question is that you have two sides presenting two different stories, but I don't hear any factual data supporting either one.
Let me see if I can
Just
help.
ideas and opinions.
Thank you, Tom. Is there anybody else from the EAC here? Peter?
Peter?
Would you care, this is being referred to the supervisors and put us in a very tough situation, so can you give us your opinion?
Peter Alkerk, 11 Spindly Lane. I went to the site on the visit in September, and when I came away from that, the structure probably is badly damaged, and I can see Tommy's point of the danger of collapsing and somebody being in there. On the other hand, I have a problem taking anything down that can't be replaced. Yeah, so I was sort of sitting on the fence there. If there was any reasonable way we could at least protect it, and if we decide in 10 years that it wasn't worth it, then take it down by all means, but I just am...
I think this is a here and now question. Not in 5 years or 10 years.
Yeah, I realize that. But that's what how I came away from the visit.
So it sounded like, if I'm characterizing, you weren't sure either way.
I wasn't convinced one way or the other.
Harry.
So many microphones. Harriet Stone, 1645 Bertrand Road. I think that's the proposal that came in that October 2nd letter, is that some of us would try to get together and get enough money that Natural Lands could stabilize that building and just live with it for a while, 5 years maybe. Then suddenly they might say, wonderful, we could do that for whatever reason. And we would try to work with them because we think they're a wonderful partner to have. And we're not trying to be standing in the way of what the good works that they're doing. So we're looking for a way that we can be helpful and put that off. It may have to just come down, but if they do some stabilizing of the foundation and closing it up, keeping it, making sure that no water or children or critters can get in there, it'll give us more time to think about it.
Thank you.
Got a lot to say tonight.
Before you say anything, is there anybody else from the EAC committee that's here that I'm missing? So that would be Suzanne, and I'm missing, who's the other member?
Suzanne's not here, Vic's not here, and
Don
Cook.
Don, that's it.
And Ken Winter.
Oh, Ken Wittek, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry?
Ken Wittek.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Merrill Joplin, 2120 Flowing Springs Road. First of all, I want to acknowledge what Tammy has said this evening. I love walking by her house. I didn't get to ever see the inside of it, but I got to see the outside on the historic railroad tour, and I'm always taking pictures and sending them. It's a beautiful property and a lot of knowledge. So I hear what she says and can appreciate it. And what I'd like to do is say, I volunteer to be part of whatever committee it would be to help raise money to work with the Natural Lands Trust, because you can never put it back up if it comes down. And believe me, I don't have a whole lot of time to do this, but I do think it's important, and I would lend a hand somehow if there was something to be done with Natural Lands Trust. Because the same way they saved, and you all saved Bryn-Coed, well, this is just a little tiny thing. You know, why not? Let's try.
Yeah, but the owners ever want to do something else, that's got to count for something.
I understand.
Just want to add, so the question was, did we have any professional documentation or opinion? And you did get that. Sarah, can you tell the audience Bob Wise's credentials and Kate's credentials, and so they understand who wrote the opinion pieces?
I can't talk to any individual pedigrees, but I can tell you that our Historic Resources Committee has been blessed to have 3 people whose profession is the documentation. They are historic architects. These are people who understand the old buildings. As you hear from Kate when she talks, she's very knowledgeable about when she says something was probably built in this time frame. I was her scribe when we took photos of a lot of the homes at Bryn-Coed, and she is pointing out all these details. She is so knowledgeable on the windows, the lintels, the look at the fine detail here on this mantle. These are people that, and Peter Benton is another one. He lives up on Hilltop, and Bob Wise. Has Wise Preservation Company, but he's now working with someone else. He serves as a technical advisor on some historic commissions in Chester County and others. So we have 3 people whose business, their careers, are assessing and protecting historic resources. So.
And the opinion pieces we gave you were from those 3 professionals. I will also like to say, just as a general, we have to be real careful. A couple things is, everyone who comes and wants to demolish a building is going to say, it's going to cost a fortune, I can't afford it, and they're going to say, I have no use for it. So it's an automatic, when people come to us, that's what they're going to say. And that's why our ordinance addresses that we don't take that into consideration, because We can't look at people's tax returns. We can't make a judgment call on who has the money to do what. All we can do is look at the historic and structural integrity of the building. And I also will caution you, beware the slippery slope here, because if you let this one go down, others are going to follow. People are going to come say, oh, we want to take this building down. And if you let this go down without any real basis, then we're going to have a lot of trouble in the future, and we have to be very careful.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
it's very straightforward. Economic hardship is not a reason.
Sarah, we got to let other people also have the floor. I didn't call on you this time. There's a lady back here. Tommy, did you want to say something?
I'll let her go first.
I'll relinquish my microphone.
Good evening, I'm Julie Foster. I have some more procedural questions, and I apologize because I haven't read the ordinance myself, but I'm not sure who the best person to address it would be. My first question is, what's the process? It sounds like this has already been designated as a Class 2 historic structure. What's the process for that determination?
Well, we're lucky we have somebody who might be able to answer that.
I can't answer that.
Okay.
Because my
Yeah,
head
no,
is now thinking about what I was going to say. Erica probably knows.
Okay, a few years ago, there was the historic subcommittee of the township, went through an inventory of historic resources of the township and put them in various classes. There was a grant through the county in order to facilitate this process. The historic atlas, as it is today, has a full inventory, an appendix with all of that, and the zoning ordinance reflects for this specific section of the historic overlay, what process to go through for Class 1, Class 2, Class 3. So you have to go back to the inventory of those historic sites. So it goes by historic parcels and those structures that are contained. So it was a committee, it was adopted by the Board of Supervisors, and then as part of that this zoning ordinance, it's an appendix of the ordinance.
Okay, so in classifying those properties, they already did historic research to
Yes.
determine the historic significance of each property?
Correct.
And when looking to destroy, since you remove a property from that list, who bears the burden of proof?
Well, for the demolition permit itself, the applicant must provide all the detail. It's outlined in the ordinance, the procedure to do so. The property owners within 500 feet have to be notified of the demolition and those activities and to provide a narrative. Our zoning officer watches over that process. And then when the application comes in, it goes to the Historic Resource Subcommittee of the EAC. The EAC has the authority by our ordinance to make recommendations and see the permit initially. And once they review that, there is, based on the class of the structure, there are timeframes allowed by the ordinance to review the application, ask for additional time to study these things. As was a result of this application, a portion was approved and a portion was, we need more time. When the EAC then, in an instance which is a little different in this case since they didn't not have a quorum at their last meeting, but should they have had, recommendation and voted no, it would actually go on to the Board of Supervisors to make that final decision.
Which is where we are today.
Yeah.
So the Natural Lands Trust is the applicant, is that
Yes,
correct?
yes.
Okay, and in their application, they have to show that the structure does not meet the elements of the ordinance to constitute a historically significant structure?
They essentially need to put together all the criteria, or really the project scope, yeah. They don't necessarily have to go and look in the consideration of the application, address each single point here in a narrative, right, Brian? I mean, that's not really...
Wait a minute, we're not proving that it's not historic, nor are we saying that it may not be. We're just saying that it is beyond reasonable repair at this point.
Yes.
Okay, so there's no dispute that it is a historical structure, that it has historical significance?
There is some dispute about its
between
age
the applicant
and
and
all
the applicant and the committee,
HRC.
for the lack of, the applicant's in agreement that it's a historically significant structure.
Well, no, I wouldn't go that far. I would say it has some historical significance, to what degree. We're not arguing to what degree, it's,
Okay, so
The
then I'm
structure
clear.
itself, tonight we've heard that possibly goes back to the 1800s, possibly the mid-1900s. So the amount of its history is up for grabs, so to speak.
But it's the applicant's burden of proof that what was previously determined to place the structure in the historic list is not applicable to, or is not accurate.
no.
No.
Put it that way.
Can maybe I can kind of clarify something. This is part of the reason why I came up after Jane, is that with historical preservation, just because a building is old doesn't mean it's historically significant or imperative to save. Historical commissions are generally set up to determine if something is worth saving or not. And I do also want to say something. Jane is here from the EAC. The one meeting that we were supposed to vote on got so out of hand that we had the full board, and we were getting smaller and smaller and smaller into a circle to try to discuss this, and we weren't allowed to. And there was, what? Sarah, did you want to say something?
Just to Harry.
Okay. Point is that Jane maintaining that we, as an EAC, are suggesting to you guys that it should be saved and all that stuff. EAC never came to that conclusion. They didn't.
We had a motion and voted on it. Would you like me to show it to you?
We did. Jane, you didn't have a quorum.
I'm not talking
And
about this
the
last
meeting
time.
before that, people were basically talking about.
Ladies, please address yourself to the board.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just saying that I do not believe that Jane is actually presenting what the EAC actually feels at this time. We haven't had a time.
Thank you.
I apologize, I'm still confused, because I thought when the property was placed on the historic structure as a Class 2 historic structure, that was the determination that it was historically significant. Is that not correct?
The building itself was, the property
Yeah.
was, but not the structures, the turkey sheds and all the stuff. They were not, as you know, they were allowed to be demolished.
Okay, because it is a Class 2 historic structure. So is this outbuilding itself on the list?
If I might just give you my understanding of it, the property, not the specific building, was classified as a Class 2. So it wasn't very specific, this building is and this building
Because
isn't.
usually the Atlas does
So if
list
you look at the historic
buildings.
resource map, they actually have the area shown as a Class 2 resource.
Julie, we often define it as the farmstead, meaning the house, the barn, and associated outbuildings.
Okay, so there is no difference between a historic structure and a historic property. They have looked at the Atlas and they do single out individual structures. I guess what my question I'm trying to figure out is, if it's already been determined as a historic building and the applicant is seeking to demolish it, and the cost of maintenance and and forgive me, due respect, Mr. Jacobs, but when they read those criteria, and it seemed the property owner's desire to tear it down was one of the considerations that's permitted. So I guess the question is, what are the considerations that the applicants demonstrated that the building should be demolished? If the applicant's the one who has to show that. Does that question make sense?
It was a very, very long question.
Yeah, I'll let one of you guys do that.
think she's asking.
But make
Yeah, I
your
guess
point-
it just seems strange that the township.
Excuse me for a second. We're looking not to act as a court, but to please tell us what you're thinking, and we can then move on.
Well, I'm trying to figure out if there's no debate that it is historically significant, then what the Natural Lands Trust has demonstrated to say that it should be torn down, what of the criteria that are to be considered under the ordinance has been demonstrated? And maybe the answer is we actually need to have a historian or an architect or an engineer to
The
quantify some
EAC
of
couldn't
these
even
things.
determine that so it's a split decision on it right now.
Right, but my question is who has the burden of proof if it's already on the list? Does the applicant have to show
This
that it
isn't a-
needs to come
it's not
off
a
the
court
list?
like that,
Or does the EAC have to show that it should stay on the list?
Can you help me out here, Joe?
I'm trying so hard to stay out of this.
I think the presumption is that it's guaranteed to stay by the ordinance, is that true?
Well, I think there is some obligation of the applicant to state its case.
Okay.
I don't want to talk in terms of burdens of proof because we're not in court
That's
with
fair.
that kind of proceeding. But by its very nature, they're making a request. They should justify their request.
Thank you.
Brian, I'll give you, hold on, Cindy. You've heard it all. Is there any movement on Natural Lands to buy time or to, is it all or nothing for Natural Lands on this bill?
No, we stand by our application and ask again for the board to approve our application for demolition.
You're making the evening very, very difficult, you know that.
Well, you know, the one thing that I failed to point out, because I thought maybe it was already widely known, we are going to put a significant investment into the Ralston homestead. Well, the Ralstons actually lived, and we, you know, so we're not, and I think that's, we think that's significant, and we would hope the township would view that favorably in light of our application.
For those people, why don't you come up here, because I'm going to ask you another question. For those of you that may not be aware of what they're doing, the house that we have the picture of, you're renovating and going to be the...
Yes, we're going to put a significant investment into the Ralston homestead, where the Ralstons actually lived in the house. And we would hope that, you know, that would be looked at favorably in light of our application for the demo of the small building, small frame building. Yeah, it's, we've heard talk about short-term and long-term stabilization. You know, the professionals who were referenced earlier did not really submit a structural report, but I think to even the layman, which I am one, to a certain degree, you know, you look at the roof, it waves at the ridge, the door that goes from the building towards the house is racked this way, so there's definitely structural integrity issues. The foundation, almost all of the mortar is gone from the joints of the stone. I mean, to even stabilize this in the short term is going to be a significant amount of money. And then once it's stabilized, it's going to be maintained, because just like, as we see, if a building's not maintained, it deteriorates. And I think the time to have saved this building was many years ago, because it's just beyond any, you know, reasonable degree of preservation. You know, it's got lead paint. And if I might, and I'm going to offer, this is a personal opinion, not Natural Lands, okay? So don't anybody call Molly and say, Brian. I think the slippery slope here is, and I'm not going to take Natural Lands out of it, for any property owner anywhere who might be faced with something like this, to compel somebody to spend money that they may not have or may not be willing to spend, I think that's the real slippery slope here. You know, it's great to preserve old buildings, but you know, there's property rights issues as well, and I think people should have some degree of latitude for, you know, what they do on their own properties. And anybody in this room could be faced with this situation at any given time. End of my personal opinion.
Okay. You indicated that it's all or nothing tonight.
Yes.
What I'm most concerned about is I see both sides of this argument, and I hate this. I just hate being in this position. But what I don't see is a true direction from the committee we set up to handle this for us. So if you could give me a couple weeks to have them have a meeting and hash this out themselves and give us a vote, a true recommendation, because right now we don't have one. Is that too much to ask?
We've gone this many months, I think a couple of weeks is a reasonable thing to ask, John.
Well, thank you for that.
We've been working on this since April, so a couple of weeks.
By the way, before you answer that, I plan on calling in sick in about a week. George, go ahead. I think I found a solution for tonight anyway, but if you have a comment, please.
Yeah, I just think there's some consensus that the building, maybe the foundation is original and possibly predates the other farmhouse and is historically significant. Also, there's a pretty good consensus that everything above the foundation was replaced in the 1900s. And maybe there's another way where we could still see both sides. I mean, if they were to remove the upper building, could you repoint and restore the foundation and the chimney foundation that's inside it, and maybe preserve our historical perspective on it? You could demark that as the site of the original log cabin, I guess, if we could prove that.
George, are you going to need a ride home?
No, I saw that. I went and saw it, and I'm certain, and I'm not an expert, but I have an old house, and I can tell about what era things were built. I'm sure the top of the building is 1900s. The foundation and what's underneath could very well be older, and I think that's the important thing, and it'd be great if we could actually prove that that is the original footprint of the log cabin. If not, if you try and keep it, I mean, there's like 4 inches of concrete poured on the floor. That's a couple tons of concrete sitting on. You should see what those beams look like underneath. I mean, there's insect and termite damages. What's that?
They're not healthy beams underneath.
No, they're terrible. And it's possible. The beams underneath look like they might be original or very old, but everything above, I'm sure, was 1900s.
But if we turn this over to the committee,
Brian, are you willing to save the foundation?
Well, we have looked at that. I mean, I appreciate the comment, but it's something we have looked at. Again, to save the foundation, we're taking off the concrete slab, which is, it's going to it'll probably cause more damage to even preserve what little foundation would be left. And we're probably talking about the foundation that's
it's
partially
only 3 feet tall.
Yeah.
It's basically the crawl space. And then you wouldn't have a maintenance issue.
We could certainly relook at something like that.
The maintenance issue on that should be minimal. If you repoint it, you're pretty much done.
Yeah, we could certainly consider something like that if that would.
It's just another possibility.
okay, then I'm going to wrap this discussion up.
No, I won't comment, John. I think we've piqued a lot of people's interest in this tonight that may not have even been aware of this building before. So I have one request. Please do not go on that property by yourself looking at this building, okay? It's trespassing, it's dangerous, the building's dangerous, the property's dangerous right now because there's heavy equipment and other work going on. So I would just encourage anybody that's saying, oh, I want to go look at this building too, don't, please.
And it's tough to walk around that building.
It really is. If you really feel you need to see it, we can, maybe give you a tour or something at some point, but please do not go there by yourself. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, just one quick question about the restoration of the building, the main house structure. Is that intended to restore it to a specific point in time, or to restore it to make it usable for modern purposes?
We don't have any specific use for it right now, but we're going to restore it as a home because one of the uses that we're considering is for a home for preserve manager. So yeah, it needs window sills are rotted and needs to be painted, put shutters back on it. Kind of restore it to what it had been. Yeah, and it's most recent when it was most recently maintained, which is probably
Right, because-
probably 30 years ago. at this point.
I would think that that would have some bearing on whether a house, or, I mean, an outbuilding that was post-1900s would have value. You know, that if you're trying to restore the house to a specific period when there would or wouldn't have been an outbuilding there, you know, then you have to conjecture what that outbuilding looked like at that period of time. If you're trying to utilize a house for modern purposes, then the value of the building goes down because we're not trying to represent the house at a specific point in time. So, you know, to Tommy's point, that we don't want signs saying, you know, this was an outbuilding from blah, 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 if we don't know exactly what it is. Is the intent of the site ever to be a sort of historic education site?
Well, yes, and I had mentioned that earlier, with this recently discovered gravestone, there was some discussion at the last EAC meeting about using that stone and maybe having some kind of thing along one of our hiking trails that kind of commemorates the farm and who lived there. I mean, it was just real high-level talk, but we are certainly willing to work with the township to achieve a goal like that, so.
Okay. Yeah, just in terms of the context of whether there's a building or whether there's no building there, just seems to me like if we know that they're going to present it as a historical site, maybe there is some value in holding off on destroying the building, but if...
I think they've indicated that that's not
Yeah.
the case. They would
Right,
prefer-
if that's not the case,
They would prefer the
then-
building not being there.
Thank you.
We've heard enough tonight. Eric, will you put this on the next board meeting and charge each of the EAC members to get together and have a vote again on this, and all of them show up?
I believe the next meeting is November 7th.
Excuse me, John, point of order is a motion and a second, but no vote. And so
It's tabled.
I didn't hear a motion to table.
No, we
So I
haven't
just
tabled
want
it
the
yet.
procedure.
We're talking about
Okay.
right now.
Yeah, so then we'll have to be, they'll have to meet a special meeting before the 5th.
EAC meeting,
Yes.
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 And then
I'll
have something.
communicate that to Vic.
Okay. So if we choose to do that, you can make that happen.
Sure.
Okay.
So there'll be a special EAC meeting, but you will render your decision at the next scheduled board of supervisors meeting? Is that-
I didn't quite hear that, so you have to speak up.
I said, so there will be a special EAC meeting, and then you will
Unless
render
you
your
want to wait
decision.
until their normal schedule.
No. But then, I just want to try it straight, and then you'll render a decision at the next regularly scheduled board of supervisors?
Correct.
If I,
November
I'm sorry,
5th,
just
right?
a point of clarification, if the EAC would vote to approve it, then it does
That's
not
it.
need to come to the Board of
Right,
Supervisors.
That's right.
But if it is voted on that it is denied, recommendation for denial,
Right.
it will come back to the board,
And when is the next supervisors meeting?
November 5th.
Okay, so we're like 3 weeks, okay.
Thank you, Brian. Now,
Brian, just a question. It is Flint Road, right?
Yes,
The address is Flint.
1880 Flint Road.
All right, thanks.
okay, now does somebody want to make a motion to?
I
what we're
move
doing
to
this?
table the previous motion.
I'll second the motion.
I'm really hearing you saying this. Is there any questions from the audience?
There's no discussion on the motion to table.
Hold on, Sandy, hold on.
I'm Sandy Melnick from Hilltop Road in Burnsville. I just want to say that this is the reason I don't come to township meetings, this kind of behavior. And it was very upsetting to me to hear someone call someone else a liar when I read the report. It looks like a lot of hard work was put into it. And
Yes, Sandy, I actually have been.
Tommy,
If you're gonna attack me, you just
Sandy,
prove my point.
please address your comments up here.
So, my question, please.
Microphone.
Microphone, sure.
I'm just staying up here because I'm next on the agenda.
Stay up here to protect me.
Okay.
So the only thing I wanted to say is that after observing what happened tonight, I was under the impression that there were two competing committees here. And it took me a long time to figure out that all of these people speaking were on the same committee, which I found rather surprising and shocking. I know that you're getting ready to install a new committee for the historic thing that you were talking about earlier, 5 new members. And I just sat there thinking, who the hell would be stupid enough to volunteer
for such a job.
You should give being a supervisor.
No, thank you. But
Thank you. Okay, folks, let's move on. We have a motion to table this.
Yep.
Seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Okay, moving on.
I'm next on the
No, you're not leaving, are you?
Yeah.
Review the
Hopefully
end.
this one's a lot less controversial.
Sign replacement.
I move to approve the placement of signs for the Bridco Edge Reserve on St. Matthew's Road in Flint.
I'll second the motion.
Any questions from the audience?
Where?
Can you please specify exactly where, how big?
Certainly.
Those lovely details.
Certainly. We submitted application for 2 sign permits. They were reviewed by the zoning officer, who came back with several comments. One was that they were too big by 0.75 square feet. So we're going to be resubmitting to make them smaller. But it also is part of the process, the supervisors, per the ordinance, need to approve the placement of the signs. So the one sign will be on St. Matthew's Road, just in from Flint, where there's, in the approximate location of a temporary sign that's there now. There's a 4x8 sign out along St. Matthew's Road. So if you didn't notice that, you probably won't notice our new one either. So. And the second one will be down Flint Road, where we are going to be installing a parking lot. So this will be the sign at the parking lot to let everyone know that's the parking lot for the preserve. So they're roughly, by ordinance, they have to be, I think, 30 square feet, no, 18 square feet, so that's what they'll be on the single post.
So the motion is to approve the placement of the 2 signs, and you will adhere to Tracy Franny, our zoning officer's wishes on the sign size.
Yes. And Tracy, by the way, gave us a very nice opinion on the clarification of the zoning language, so we appreciate her efforts.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the audience? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Aye. Thank you, Brian, you may go.
Check the agenda and make sure. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
What do we have next? Request for Kimberton Hunt to park at the Brinco Ed Park.
I move to approve the Kimberton Hunt Club request to park at the Bridco Ed Park.
I'll second the motion.
I'm really tickled over this. This is great. I hope there's no conversation on this. Okay.
Thank you.
I think this is really wonderful. So you let them know right away tomorrow? Because I'm pretty sure it's going to pass unanimously.
Oh,
All those in
however that
favor?
proceeds.
Aye.
Okay. Oh, and if I may, there was a letter attached here from Kimberton Hunt as a thank you to the police department here for their assistance on October 6th with the Chester County Day activities. There were a lot of things going on. It was all very well coordinated, so just wanted to add that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Where are we now? Non-uniform pension plan payment. Erica, you want to?
Sure. Annually, the township receives our state aid for pension. We have our minimum municipal obligation for our police defined contribution fund, or defined benefit fund, and for the non-uniform members, including AFSCME and management, we go through and calculate with that remaining balance what we can add to the obligation on the township's contribution to the non-uniform plan. That total from the general fund that would need to be made to fund the plan for this year is $16,287.57. It is within the budget. From year to year, we do track the amount of state aid we receive and do the best we can with those figures. It was slightly lower than last year. Our MMO was a little bit higher this year, so that factored into this.
Okay, do I have a motion?
I move to approve payment of $16,287.57 from the general fund into the non-union pension.
I'll second the motion.
Any questions from the audience? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next is the purchase of a police patrol car.
I move to authorize police chief Swinninger to purchase a 2019 Tahoe from Patriot Chevrolet at a cost of $37,278 under CoStar, and to authorize $7,145.11 to outfit the vehicle for police work through Emergency Vehicle Outfitters, which is also under CoStarz, for a total of $44,423.11.
And I'll second the motion.
Any comments from the audience? Brian? Before he gets up there, what's the trade-in value of the old car?
$2,800 approximately.
That sound low to you?
Yes, I thought so too. So we're gonna get another hard look at that. I think it could be a little higher myself. But with the police vehicle, that can be a little tougher.
I
because people
agree,
know.
but it doesn't
Yeah.
have over like 96,000 miles. or
Yeah,
something.
86,000.
And what year is it?
2009.
It's just really ugly, so we might have to pay somebody
Yeah,
to take
yeah.
it.
Well, I think, just the use of it.
Brian?
Are we basically replacing one vehicle, one type of vehicle with the same type, or are we changing vehicle type here?
Changing.
This is changing vehicle type, going from sedan to SUV.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Next is the board meeting schedule discussion. Since there's nothing in my package. That
This
was,
was brought up by Bernie last
Yeah,
meeting, right?
a meeting or two ago, right?
To go to a one meeting.
One
per
meeting a
month.
month. My thought process is that it takes double the energy for the staff to put together for a meeting, and it's almost like they're constantly just preparing for meetings rather than being able to get work done. And certainly it impacts all of us three here for the amount of meetings we have to come to, the expense of engineering and legal, and certainly in the audience. I mean, to have to come every 2 weeks is a burden.
Well, my only concern is it's almost 9 now.
Right.
And the way our meetings have been going over the last few years I've been here, they're long. And I think having one meeting may just be unacceptable at
Well,
times.
my experience from 8 years as a council person in West Conshohocken was that I could probably count on one hand the amount of times that we went over 10 o'clock at night.
Okay, was it a township like this?
It was somewhat different than this, than urban community, but they had a lot more on the agenda and a lot more work to get done. They were just very efficient in what they did.
Yeah.
But as far as resident participation,
There was a lot of resident participation. I think when people know they have limited time, they tend to make their comments more concise.
I just worry about the fracture in this township since I've been involved has gotten better, in my opinion. But it still has a way to go. And part of that way can be had by being open and above board and hearing your neighbors and addressing them civilly whenever possible. From that standpoint, I just really have trouble even considering it in my mind. Also, your comment regarding the attorneys, they, and the engineer, they only show up one meeting anyway a month. So, and the other way around it is have one meeting a month with a workshop, well, that would be kind of pointless to do.
Right. But you could always have one meeting a month, and then if you absolutely need to have another one, you just have a special meeting.
well, then you have to advertise.
So,
Costs money. We advertise all our meetings at the first of the year, or December, right?
January, December.
December.
You know what else they did in West Country, Bernie? They advertised a workshop, and it's not really a workshop, it's really a public meeting. And they advertised that regularly, in the beginning of the year, like you do here. But they only called that workshop meeting when there's a large item that needed a lot of public participation. then we'd use that workshop for that.
You mean like tonight?
It could be like tonight, the gate issue, that's a lot of participation, how to spend proceeds from the sewer sale, that would have been a special meeting, because that took a lot of participation. And it's what they did there, it seemed to work for them. Then they weren't committed every month to 2 meetings, they only had that meeting reserved for more significant
So how
things
did
that
they
would take a lot
notify
of time.
people that it was on or off?
Oh, it's agendas. How do you notify people now?
Well, it's a set schedule. We don't cancel, well, we don't cancel many meetings, but if we were to cancel a public meeting, what would we do?
You put it on the website.
That's it? Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's
Posted.
Be able to go out and have some fun. I'm not gonna be able to come to a decision tonight, so I'm gonna vote.
No, we're not voting, there's no
No,
motion.
I know. I know we don't have a motion, but in keeping with what I just said about participation for the township have any preference, 1 or 2 meetings? I mean, this is better than reality TV, certainly.
One, I like one.
I like 2.
Hold on. People are saying one meeting, raise their hand. Okay, people request, I think, 2 meetings. Brian, did you raise your hand twice?
He's undecided.
Well, that's, it's like 12 to 8. But anyway, so if you don't mind, I just want to consider it a little longer.
So we have time, we want to do it until the reorg anyway, or, December, I guess. We advertise.
So we can put it on next agenda. Is that time enough?
Well, I can always say I need more time. Yes, Brian?
Well, the question I have is I haven't heard of a lot of questions directed to the staff of what would this be, how would it affect bill payments and things like that they do. So that's a question to them,
I've already asked that on a few occasions, but I just didn't get to share it.
And what was their response?
Bill shouldn't be a problem. And Erica loves these meetings. So.
It's all good.
Maria?
I'm just wondering if we have any information on how many meetings are like an hour or an hour and a half, because it seems to me a lot more run closer to 9 o'clock than to 8 o'clock. And if you go to 1 meeting a month, those meetings are going to be just brain dead with a lot of issues. There's, obviously, like from tonight's meeting, there was a lot of great information, and I'm very proud of the way that it was handled, that we have a committee that had 2 different points of view, and that's why they couldn't come to a decision, and they brought those points here. So if we start, trying to get down to 1 meeting a month, do we run the risk of losing that kind of dialogue? And I just don't know that, 1 meeting a month is really, in this township, there's just so much stuff that gets talked about.
Thank you. Okay, any other last minute comments before we switch over to this, my favorite part of the meeting? Seeing none? Now we're up for a public comment on non-agenda items. Sarah?
Surprise.
Who said that?
Her sister. I really came up to answer Sandy's question, because since she hasn't been here a lot, there is the EAC by ordinance is responsible to act as a historic commission if we don't have one, like we will soon have one. There is also the Historic Resources Committee, which is an informal committee. It's been designated a subcommittee to the EAC so that our historians, Isabel Travellini, John Eldridge, lots of people with enthusiasm for history who have put on the tours that have happened in the township and have done a fair amount of research. That's the HRC, and we've also, Harriet chairs the HRC, so I came up to talk on. But there are things that we've been tracking on behalf of the EAC. They really would like to be liberated from the history part. They say they want to get back to the the environmental part, and not spend so much time on demolitions, for example. So there are a number of other members of the HRC here, but so there were two committees, but there really were two factions within the EAC as well. So thanks.
Any other comments? Yes, Don.
Sorry. Donna Delaney, 2147 Beaver Hill Road. I just had a question for Mr. McGrory, who is the only one I can't see. I'm still taken with the idea that we're calling the demolition of the buildings at Bryn Coed on the township-owned parcel maintenance. And I'm wondering if that's a legal use of the word to say that demolition is maintenance. So is there a way to look into that?
I have looked into it, and I've advised the board accordingly.
Oh, okay, all right, thank you. I just want to make sure we weren't.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Oh.
Maria? Just remember, Joe's getting cranky.
Yeah, I know. I just want to remind everyone that on October 27th, we have a fall festival here at the park, and hope that everyone comes. It's a great event that hopefully brings the community together. It's a scarecrow contest, a carved pumpkin, some inflatables, some stuff for all ages. So we hope you come on out.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? George, can you give me a ride home?
I move to adjourn.
Where's home? Because you're
I'll
second motion.
All those in favor? Aye. Thank you all for coming.
When I said that we had some hanging for 2 months, I take it back. I don't want
You guys,